if we look at the root of these issues, and if we think of as a church, how can I speak to this? Or what does the Bible say about this? What is our Christian view on this? Then it wouldn't come to the point where a doctor sits in an office trying to figure out what am I supposed to do.
A very warm welcome to the Lausanne Movement podcast for those who have a passion to accelerate global mission together. My name is Jason Watson, and today on the podcast, we are joined by Dr. Cara Collymore Lashley, a medical professional who works and lives in the Caribbean. During our time together, Dr. Cara shares insights into the spiritual climate of the Caribbean and how she views her job as a medical professional as an act of worship and as an act of mission. And so whether you're a medical professional yourself, a ministry leader, or a workplace person simply seeking to figure out ways how to better integrate your faith with your work, I want to invite you to grab your headphones and let's dive into today's interview with Dr. Cara Collymore Lashley.
Well, Dr. Cara Collymore Lashley, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
I just want to say congratulations for your new marriage. 2 months married to Mr. Lashley, and I'm sure that he is very blessed to have you as his new bride. Thank you for being a part of the podcast and just sharing with us today. So today what I'm really hoping to get out of this conversation is you are in the Caribbean and you are our very first guest from the Caribbean. And so I welcome, by the way.
Thank you.
And you, no pressure for representing all of the Caribbean and speaking on their behalf. But really it would just be wonderful to hear what is going on there. And the other thing that I would love to chat to you about is just being a doctor. And not a PhD doctor, a medical doctor, and being a Christian who's passionate about mission, being a doctor in the workplace, and what that is like for you. I have some friends very close friends who are doctors, and they have a lot of questions about what it looks like for them to be doctors in the workplace who love Jesus and how they can serve God and his kingdom. And so I'm hoping to talk on their behalf and chat to you as if they are sitting in the seat with us. So I want to kick off this interview just in the same way that I kick off almost every interview that we've had, and that's just to hear your story. I would love to give you an opportunity just to share a bit about your background, how you came to love Jesus and love his mission.
So intriguingly, I've never known myself without knowing that I would do medicine and I would do mission. So from a very, very young age, I knew that this is what I was meant to do. I don't think it was a decision that was made. It was more of a consciousness that I was made aware of. So from like 3, 4, this is what I said. I want to be a missionary doctor. As time has progressed, what that looks like has changed. And I mean, the world has changed from when I was 3 or 4. So what is needed in the world has changed. But I grew up in a Christian home in Barbados, and both of my parents are Barbadian. And we went to a Southern Baptist church, a small Southern Baptist church, very much supported by foreign missionaries when I was very young. And I came to Christ when a missionary team there, they were teaching the Bible study, the evangelistic tool, the Roman Road. So they were teaching the Roman Road. I was at church, not in Bible study, but at church, doing something in the background. And there was something that caught my attention, that all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. And I became aware, even though I would go to Sunday school, even though I knew scripture, it had never dawned on me that I'm not a Christian. So the following morning, I asked my mother about it, and I got to the crux of the matter. I tend to be good at. And I asked her, well, if I die now, would I go to hell? And she said, well, yes. But in that moment, when that realization came, is when I gave my life to Christ. And that served me well, because a few months to years later, my parents actually were divorced. And that was a very difficult time for me and for our family. But through that all, I had my faith. And I was able to see a father in God, even in ways I would not have seen a father in my life as a young female growing up. So I continued to pursue medicine. So that was sciences in school, went to university, studied in the Caribbean, and maybe at some points mission was not as important as a teenager, but definitely going into medical school in Trinidad, I was a part of the IFES movement there, which was called IBCF, and they just kind of swept me up. So I went from just being a part of a local chapter to being involved in national events, to being taken to regional events, to being taken to global events. And then I kind of never looked back from there. That involvement in IFES has just kind of put me in good stead to be on track with mission.
Yeah. I just love that, when you feel a calling on your life from a very young age, and some people tend to run away from it, and some people tend to lean into it more. But it's just so beautiful to hear how God had a call on your life from such a young age, and how that trajectory has almost stayed as straight as it could be.
Yeah.
And when I was younger, I wanted to be a doctor, and I was just too lazy in school to get the marks I needed. But at the end of the day, I think I ended up where God had planned for me. So I'm grateful that you're a doctor and I am not. As I said, you're the very first guest that we've had from the Caribbean.
Okay.
And I would love to hear from you. And for those who are listening, just what is the spiritual climate like there? We all know that the Caribbean has got beautiful climate and beautiful beaches. And maybe some of us have been and gone to the islands, but could you tell us what the spiritual climate is like and what God is doing there and what is happening?
The Caribbean, I mean, it is a big task to speak for all of the Caribbean, but I've lived in 3 Caribbean islands, so that's good. I studied in Trinidad and I lived and worked in St. Vincent for 5 years, and I'm Barbadian and live there now. In the Caribbean, we wish that we could report that there is revival. We were evangelized hundreds of years ago. And I think many would attest in their regions, there has been lots of evangelism and not a lot of discipleship. And with lack of discipleship there's lack of maturity, lack of church growth, lack of missions, endeavors, etc. And unfortunately, that's where we find ourselves. I mean, there are many denominations, there are many established denominations. The church that I go to now is a Pentecostal church, and the denomination is actually founded in the Caribbean. So it's the Pentecostals Association of the West Indies. So, and there are Bible schools, there are persons learning the Bible, studying the Bible, etc. But from my perspective, when there is a fervency for God and a hunger for God and just that exponential growth of the church, I haven't seen that in my lifetime. It has happened before, but I haven't seen that in my lifetime. And I think, I know that it's affecting our societies because the church is not the prophetic voice and we are not declaring and displaying Christ. Then we see in our societies the slow degradation of our societies. So even in my beautiful country, unfortunately, you've seen a lot more crime. We've seen a lot more attempt at suicide and things like that, which are all in my thought process. All of these things are just a result of sin.
What do you believe the reason is behind the slow decline of the church in the Caribbean?
The challenge has always been for the Caribbean. The Caribbean initially they were indigenous peoples, Indian peoples, very much like the Maya and the Aztec in South America. And then most of the people who lived there now are people who came. That's how I like to put it. So African people who would have come, then there were Indian people who would have come, and also some European people who would have been brought specifically for labor, and how we have been brought and placed in the Caribbean, and then the association of church and Christianity with the ways that we were brought. There is some level of merging something beautiful with something not good. There's a part of our history which is not good. There's a part of our history that needs to be redeemed. And in many ways, Christians were a part of that history. And I think that has is followed on into generations where it almost feels as though many local Caribbean people do not feel like they can lead anything, like they can start anything. Like we need somebody to do that for us.
Wow. Okay.
So it comes to a point where we need to see ourselves as like, to see our own creativity, to see our own ability, to see that we can start things, we can leave things, and that we are people of value in the kingdom as well.
I love the way that you define that as there are things that need to be redeemed from our past, and that's the story of the gospel, right?
Yeah.
The gospel is a redemption story.
Yeah.
What are some of those things that need to be redeemed?
So in terms of our story, in terms of slavery, with most of the Indian persons of Indian descent, they would have come as indentured servants. And many of the Europeans who were there as well were actually prisoners who were sent to work. And we just finished emancipation and the celebration of emancipation. And with this celebration, we look back at things like what life was like to be a slave in the Caribbean. Our main producers of finance would have been sugar, cotton initially, sugar as well, and working on sugar plantations. While it's something I've grown up with, it's something that I've understood, it's not a good thing. It's very much not a good thing. And I think that it's still reflected in some ways in the way that we see ourselves, in the way that we represent ourselves and the things that we cling to. So what I see in society is persons either try to be very European because that's good, or people reject anything European and move towards things which are associated with Africa. And with that, there are lots of mixture of religion and different thoughts about religion, which it's not scriptural, it's not biblical.
So as you look at these areas that need the redemption of the gospel, how have you seen the gospel enter into those spaces?
The beauty of it is that the church lives in the Caribbean. Yes. God's church lives in the Caribbean. So I don't want it to be all doom and gloom.
100%.
Because God, from the time the church was planted in the Caribbean, it has taken root and the church exists. Even in our time, where I feel as though God has been keeping his church, he has definitely kept his church. So my great-grandmother was Baptist. My great-grandparents were Baptist. So that's like 4th generation Christian. And that's a beautiful thing. That's a beautiful heritage to be able to have. So it's wonderful to see God at work in those ways and keeping families and seeing generations of Christians in our societies.
Have you got any stories that you'd like to share with us? Because you're right. I mean, where the church is, there's a light that's shining. We've spoken into the darkness that we're experiencing in the Caribbean. How have you seen God at work within the Caribbean?
Seeing God at work in the Caribbean is, I'm going to go back to when I was a student at the university. And I am going to share about our time in Trinidad, my time was between 2007, 2010, but over a 5 to 10 year span, because in the Caribbean, we have one university, the University of the West Indies, but there are several campuses. So there is a campus in Barbados, there's one in Trinidad and Tobago, there's one in Jamaica. When I was studying, you cannot do every area of study at every campus. So you would have to go to some campuses. So a number of us went to Trinidad, and the student ministry in Trinidad has been the flagship for student ministry in the Caribbean for quite a while. It's established. Denise Margaret Thompson will be speaking here, and her mother actually started the student ministry in Trinidad. And while we were there, at least 5 to 10 of us went back home and volunteered with our own movement. So imagine, mostly people come in to study like medicine, engineering, those things, very highly professional professions. Persons felt God's call. We were discipled there and felt God's call to volunteer with national movements in our own country. So it was almost like Trinidad had supplied all of the staff and volunteer staff for most of the Caribbean, because you come from Jamaica to Trinidad, you go back, you go on staff. You go from Barbados, you go back, you go on staff. The rest of the Caribbean really was gifted by what was happening in Trinidad at that time.
I love that it's almost like a mission sending space. So it's from the Caribbean into the Caribbean, right? Yeah. And that's part of one of the reasons that I wanted to sit down with you at this table and to talk with you, because often when we talk about missions, it's always about going out. But so many of us still have a mission field within. And I know that you see yourself as a missionary to your own nation. I don't know if you would use those words, but it's how I kind of interpret the heart that you have for your country and how you see your calling. So let's talk about your profession. Let's talk about the fact that you are a medical doctor, not PhD. It's a lot of PhDs on the podcast, but you are a medical doctor, and I have two very close friends that love the Lord, love medicine, feel that it is what God has called them to do, but they've struggled over the past couple of years as they have entered into the workspace to figure out what that means for them. And so if you were to sit across the table from a fellow doctor, imagine that I am a doctor and I'm coming to you and I'm saying, Dr. Collymore Lashley, please tell me what advice do you have to give me as a doctor who loves Jesus? What would you say?
I would say you're uniquely placed to be a part of God's mission. Very few people are able to say that they're given the opportunity to be a part of healing daily. So we are able to heal. We are part of God's healing if we allow Him to use us. And then we also have the opportunity to declare and proclaim His gospel daily to those around us. Often, when people think about medicine, we think about patients, and our patients are very important. But the fraternity of medicine as a whole, there are many people around us who do not understand or who are not open to or who just are longing for more. Because the reality is in life that people attain status, so they become the academic status, so you become a professor, etc. Persons get what they wanted financially, you get the family, and then many people I see in my profession are not happy and they're not satisfied. And our lives are to show that satisfaction comes from Jesus only. In how we live, we show that we are satisfied with life, and many people will ask, why are you so happy? Do you work in the same place that I do? But in your day-to-day life, because different people, different specialties and different opportunities. I know definitely for me, working in the hospital is very challenging. It's very demanding in terms of your time, emotion, everything you give to the practice of medicine, it feels like. And my suggestion would be to allow God to use you so you can be the hands and feet of Jesus. And I have been learning in the last few years that you can also be the voice of Jesus.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's had some really amazing experiences. But it takes being very intentional about it and being very mindful that your work is an act of worship. I am doing this for God. I am doing this for God. How would you have me do it, Jesus?
That's so beautiful. Could you share some stories of how you have been both the hands of Jesus and the voice of Jesus?
Yeah, and one of my absolutely favorite stories is around COVID, we had a young boy who came from a neighboring island because he was in an accident and the treatment that was being offered was amputation for his leg. His family reached out to a surgeon, an orthopedic surgeon in Barbados who was willing to take on the case. So he came over, and the first time I met him was in his first surgery. I was the newest person in my department, so I was not even very skilled at what I was doing yet. But we connected because he was clearly scared. It was during COVID, and there are lots of different protocols. So he was alone in a space, and we were all wearing hazmats and stuff like that. So he didn't know anyone. And just because of a turn of events, we ended up being there alone, and he just started to cry. And he just started, which I thought was a natural response for a child, to being alone, to cry.
I'm an adult and I would cry.
So I thought that was quite a natural response. And in that moment, I started to sing the song Oceans. And it soothed him. He stopped crying. And then as it turned out, well, I thought it was coincidence that I would always end up having to be a part of his surgeries until his surgeon saw me on the corridor and was like, I want to do something else for him. When are you going to be at work? And it was so funny because I couldn't provide anesthesia on my own, but he saw the connection that we had. He was scared of the operating theater. He was scared. He'd had to come so many times. He was scared of the operating theater. He never liked to come. But that relationship grew. So I actually went down on the ward to see another child, and his parents reached out to me because he told them, that's my daughter. That's the daughter who sings for me. I was able to stay connected to them. He was able to leave, go home. I gave them a gift. He came back and they made sure to come and see me, and he asked for me, which is how I knew that he was back. One of the things that his mother said to me was, he listens to that song when you're not around. Like when he's here alone in the evenings or at night, if anything difficult is happening, that's the song he asks for us. So that is just wow. For me, that's just like wow.
Yeah, it's just an opportunity to share the love of Christ in your workspace with someone who really needs it. I mean, that whole period of COVID, I think none of us like to talk about it. It's just it's too traumatic, and I'm just an ordinary citizen. I'm sure as a doctor it was way more intense. So I'd be curious to hear from you. You know, doctors have to deal with a lot of ethical dilemmas on a daily basis, and our belief in Jesus informs a lot of how our values and how we respond to certain situations. I'd be curious to hear from you how you have found your own belief system in Christ and your value system that comes out of the Bible, how that informs the way that you are a medical practitioner.
So being medical is a very interesting space. It's an interesting space to navigate. And I think, you're there at the beginning of life, the end of life, and everything in between. And we are living in a world that's pushing the limits of what is the beginning of life, what's the end of life, and questioning most things in between. And for me as a doctor, as a Christian doctor, there has to be a distinctive between how I practice medicine. My understanding of medicine has to be framed. It has to fit into the framework of my understanding of scripture, my understanding of Jesus, and a Christian worldview. In our context, I think the biggest thing would be abortion, beginning of life issues. So for me, my colleagues know I do not offer sedation, or I do not offer anesthesia for an elective abortion. Now, there has to be, a decision had to be made about what do you do, what do you not do, and when do you, where does the line stop? If someone is dying, I will not withhold care from you. Some people can have complications of an attempted abortion, but if your life is at risk, actually at risk this moment, there's no way that I would withhold care from you. However, considering it's become commonplace to think of the convenience of that, and I know it's a very polarizing topic, but I think when I think about medicine and I think about ethics, definitely I think that we should be very careful about using medicine to answer ethical questions or to deal with societal issues. So the real issue is premarital sex, because
Right.
And interestingly, I actually did a paper about ethics, and I spoke to an older doctor who had helped to pass abortion laws in Barbados. And he said, I was doing it to protect the women because they were going and doing it outside and it was not safe. And that's a space where the church needed to be, where the church needed to reach out and speak to young women and to speak to society, not only young women, because it takes more than young women to have children, but needed to address an issue within the church. And because the church did not address a specific issue, then it spilled over into medicine.
Right.
And I think that for most issues which are ethical, if we look at the root of these issues, and if we think of as a church, how can I speak to this? Or what does the Bible say about this? What is our Christian view on this? Then it wouldn't come to the point where a doctor sits in an office trying to figure out what am I supposed to do.
Wow. Yeah. I really appreciate the dynamic you brought into this conversation, because you're informing us that the church has a role that could truly support a doctor so that they don't even have to make a decision.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a role that the church needs to play within the society, and there's a role that the doctor needs to play in the society. How can the church, I know this might be a broad question, but how can the church better support doctors?
In terms of, this is a very broad question. Yeah. So in terms of the church supporting doctors, I think, I'll speak from my experience.
Please do.
What I have. I think oftentimes it's very hard for people to understand what we deal with and what we go through. For example, during COVID, that was a very lonely time for me as a physician. And there were times where I felt like I was not welcome in church, or I was not welcome at work in many instances. So I think when you think of the doctors among you, to pray for them, to pray with them, to ask more than just, how are you doing today? Maybe some deeper questions. Oftentimes we're going through many challenging situations, and many of the situations you're not able to speak about publicly. So definitely praying for them and with them. But also I know in terms of addressing issues as they need to be addressed from a Christian perspective. So addressing issues like premarital sex, addressing being the prophetic voice of Jesus in our generation. I think that would help a lot.
0%.
Yeah.
So let's move over to doctors for just a moment. What prophetic role does a Christian medical doctor play within the broader medical field? What roles can they play? Like, where are the gaps in medicine? We hear at the Fourth Luzon Congress speaking about the gaps in the Great Commission. What are the gaps?
Interestingly, when I was studying medicine, I thought, or I still think a lot about least reached peoples. And it is very interesting that we're all familiar with the 1040 window because that's like Lausanne nomenclature of culture. So it's very interesting to me that in this space where people hardly, the least reached peoples of the world, those people who are gospel poor are also resource poor. So while in Barbados, you can choose which doctor you want to go to. If your doctor's not there, you can see another doctor. There are some people in this world in 2024 where there's one doctor to 12,000 people. Yeah. There are still people where medicine is not available to them. And I believe strongly that showing the love of Christ means us trying to fill that gap, definitely. And for me, I think, and traditionally, I know people went with missions hospitals and missions organizations and did just purely missions work. So it meant leaving technically your professional life and doing that. I think that in this time, we need to consider another option. We need to consider, can you get a job, like an actual job, working in some of these countries and providing care, and in some of these countries that will not allow the establishment of mission hospitals, etc. So that's definitely one gap. Additionally, when I think about medicine in the Caribbean, just the culture of medicine is almost at loggerheads with Christian culture. Here's the truth. Most doctors do anything that's not good. And so it can be very difficult to socialize with doctors as a Christian. So I think Christian doctors have a responsibility to our colleagues, our peers, and to medical students, Christian medical students, to create a safe space for them, but also to create a witness to other doctors. Many doctors become dissuaded, burnt out, because of the load that we carry, just to remind people or to demonstrate to people what life can look like if you take your burdens to Jesus. So if we take our burdens to Jesus and we are refreshed at his feet, then we can show other persons how our lives are different that way as well.
You pointed out two really important things that I would love to maybe unpack a little bit more. Okay. The one was the opportunities that actually are out there for kingdom work that are outside the original traditional paradigm of medical doctors. The other had to do with the fraternity.
Yeah.
So could we talk about the opportunities in both those spaces of could you just maybe list a few examples of what it might look like? Say there's a medical doctor listening to this. Hopefully someone has sent it out to a friend and they said, you got to listen to this conversation. What opportunities are there for Christian doctors who want to advance God's kingdom in the world?
So if you're a Christian doctor, you want to advance God's kingdom in the world, there is a traditional route where you could become a missionary and you could go somewhere.
You give up the salary.
You give up your salary and you go somewhere. Yeah. And the interesting thing about going with a sending organization is that there is a community. There's a pre-established community. So people are not only giving money, people will pray. And there is member care and there are all of those things available. But you could decide, God may call you and say to you, like, for instance, for another reason, so because of my work in student ministry, I went to St. Vincent and the Grenadines shortly after finishing medicine. And while I was there, when I was going, I decided to work as a doctor. I did not expect, I was just working as a doctor to support myself. I did not expect that, like, what happened there would happen. So I became very established in the profession. I was promoted twice in one calendar year. I became a household name as a doctor. Like, when I wanted to leave, I had to wait until my boss was on vacation to resign, kind of thing. So you can have that. God can lead you to somewhere. And, well, as I've learned, it does not have to be somewhere very far away. It could just be someplace else where he wants to have a child of his in that space at that time. Or it can be someplace very far away. So sometimes I often look at countries that are predominantly Muslim or countries that are close to the gospel, and I just look to see like what types of jobs are available for doctors. And many of these countries are actually looking for female doctors. Interestingly enough. And an interesting fact is that anesthesia, which I am training in, is the second most required specialist doctor in the world. Surgery is the first. So things like that, shaping your career in a way that will allow God to use you, and knowing that you can travel, and also preparing yourself to be able to work everywhere. I think as a doctor in the Caribbean, where our qualifications are not recognized everywhere else, I'm mindful of that and constantly thinking about how do I make sure I'm able to go to the ends of the earth, should God call.
I love that you are shaping your own career path with all the potentials, right? What are some organizations that are particularly associated with medical doctors? Like I'm thinking missions organizations or non-profits that are some options that people could take or explore, be interested in.
So one of my friends sent me an email from Mercy Ships, which is, I think, well known in Africa for sure. Mercy Ships is an organization where you can travel and you can do a certain amount of time. There are some short-term, some long-term positions, and you actually work on the ship. They provide surgeries for persons who are disadvantaged along the coastline, mostly of Africa. So that's a good option. There are many other organizations, missions organizations have medical arms. So there's Africa in the Mission, and I know people who've worked with them. And they've actually been able to do different things in terms of how you work with them, etc.
Let's talk about the fraternity of Christian doctors. What are some ways that Christian doctors can, what fraternities are they? Maybe that's a better question.
Oh, well, that's a good question. So there is the International Christian Medical and Dental Association, which is present in over 100 countries currently. And their vision and mission is to see a Christian witness through doctors and dentists in every community in the world. So that's a great one to start with. For a Christian medical fraternity, there's also Hospital Christian Fellowship in places, and that's more for just healthcare workers, not specific to doctors as well. And then there are grassroots organizations which will pop up and try to support each other because of how challenging it can be and how lonely it can be as a healthcare professional, a Christian healthcare professional.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like just talking to you has really enlightened me on how I can support the doctors within my own church and my own community and even my friends. So I got a question, and it came up as I was preparing for this conversation. As I was thinking about the fact that you're a doctor in the Caribbean, I wondered to myself, how did you get connected with the Lausanne? And why Lausanne? So you are on the board of directors as well.
Yes.
How do you make that connection? Why did you make that connection?
So that's an interesting story. My first Lausanne gathering was in 2016 in Jakarta. And I was involved in student ministry. When I finished medicine, I actually between medicine, I took a year off and I volunteered with student ministry in Barbados. And then after medicine, I pioneered the student ministry in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And while I was doing that is when the Younger Leaders Gathering in Jakarta was happening. And another young lady involved in student ministry, who's actually here, she nominated me to be able to go. So that's how I went to the first Congress. And I had a wonderful time at that gathering. I mean, there were 1,000 people. You met some people. There were quite a few people from the Caribbean who I knew, etc. But it wasn't like come join the board after that Congress. Actually, the Associate Global Director of Generations, Nana Yao, because he leads the YL Gen 1 now. We have to call it YL Gen 1 now because we expect a YL Gen 2 shortly. He was emailing persons as he was praying for their countries. And when he emailed Barbados, I actually remember it was just as we were entering COVID. And he emailed, and it resonated with a prayer that I was praying. I was trying to decide which specialty to do, and should I even be here? Those kind of questions, very heavy questions. And I saw this email, and I responded to his email, which clearly it was not specific to me, but I responded to his email to tell him how it had touched me. And then I found out that his wife is a doctor because he responded to my email, and she is an anesthesiologist as well. that started a friendship, which Lausanne is built on friendships. And that started a virtual friendship for the first 2 years. And we just became very good friends. And based on that friendship, he has definitely opened the door for me into this ministry. So I now also study a Master's of Arts in Global Leadership at Gordon College. Is what I'm doing.
So is that 2 degrees at once?
Yes. So,
Rather you than me, but congratulations. Very exciting.
and then he also recommended me to represent the YL Gen on the Lausanne board. So the board has been very committed to seeing younger leaders and having intergenerational leadership. So that's how that ended up. And it does take a bit of you, and it takes a bit of juggling. I think my response to him at first was, if they're willing to understand my time restraints, I will do it. But it does take a bit of juggling. But when I think about what God is doing now and being able to be a part of that and being able to witness that and to learn from the amazing people on the board and sit with them and see how we process things, challenges, triumphs, how they default to God for everything, and how well they work together from so many diverse backgrounds just because of their love for Jesus and their love for missions, it's worth it. It's worth the struggle. Yeah.
Wonderful. What would you say to any workplace people? I mean, we've been speaking to doctors, so obviously they're the clear audience here. Yeah. But what would you say to a workplace person wondering if they have a space within the Lausanne movement?
Most definitely there is a space for you within the Lausanne movement. For any, as long as you identify as Christian and you can affirm the Lausanne Covenant, there is definitely a space for you here. And we recognize the gaps that exist in terms of just preparing people and preparing and discipling people and enabling them to serve in their workplace. And we are eager to do better. We're eager to help, to collaborate, as we're doing so much this week, and to fill that gap and to prepare a generation of people who will rise up and just serve God where they are.
Cara, this has been such an enlightening conversation. I've actually truly enjoyed it, just because I have friends that are so close to your profession. Have you got any last words that you'd like to leave with those who are listening in?
I think I would like to say, one of the things I love about Lausanne is that it's an organization or movement that embraces majority world people. And one thing I would like to say is that God can use you no matter who you are, no matter where you're from, if we give ourselves to him. And if we are the kind of people that he can entrust himself to, then he will definitely use you.
Wow. What a way to end this podcast. Cara, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much for having me.